Due to the positive reactions from playtesters of the first Ratchet Clank game, Insomniac Games started work on a sequel before the first one was finished. If you look at their release schedule, Insomniac are very effective when it comes to game development, meaning that it only took them a year to release Ratchet Clank 2 Locked and Loaded, or Ratchet Clank Going Commando in America. I'm going to be honest, I was not looking forward to reviewing this game. While I played Ratchet Clank 1 and 3 for hours and hours when they came out during the PS2 era, I never even beat Ratchet Clank 2. I was around 12 at the time, but even then the game felt off to me, and I quit during my second spaceship fight. What this means for you watching is that I have no nostalgia for this game, which might make me more objective, but no promises. When looking up information on the game, I found that it had reviewed very well, and a lot of people really liked it. So, at the risk of this review receiving the same hateful comments as my Jak 2 review, let's dive into Ratchet Clank 2 Locked and Loaded for the PS2. Once again, I am playing the HD version on the PS3 for this review. The game begins with Ratchet & Clank relaxing as the galaxy currently has no need for any heroes. The two are then teleported to a different galaxy by a man called Abercrombie Fizzwidget, who is the president of a company called Megacorp. Fizzwidget teleports them to him so he can ask him to retrieve a small creature for him that was recently stolen. I don't want to give any more of the plot away, but Ratchet & Clank must deal with Fizzwidget, a thief, a female Lombax called Angela, and a space gang called Thugs for Less to find out exactly what is going on and save the day. I found the story in this game to be all over the place. There's no real clear villain in this game, so unlike in the first game, there's no real clear goal keeping the story together. Events just seem to occur and Ratchet & Clank just go along with everything. Gem Drek was such a great villain in the first game that by having no villain at all feels like a mistake. It seems like they might have been going for a plot revolving around finding out the truth of what's going on and solving a mystery, but the plot meanders too much for this angle to work. You spend a decent amount of time dealing with the Thugs for Life, who in the grand scheme of things have no real importance to the overall plot, so everything you do with them is a waste of time. The story isn't terrible, and there is a good reveal towards the end of the game, so maybe I'm being overly critical because the first game did such a great job with its story, but I found the story here to be weak. It also doesn't help that the cutscenes aren't as funny. They're still decently entertaining and maintains the same sense of humour, but there's no real memorable moments and a lot of jokes just sit there. I didn't expect to laugh out loud, but I would definitely say that there's been a drop in quality when it comes to the writing. Ratchet & Clank 2 is an action-adventure game where you travel across a galaxy exploring planets. Each planet will have platforming sections, puzzles, and a large number of enemies to get past. Let's start by looking at the changes to the controls and combat. X still jumps, square is still your range, and circle is still your equipped weapon. This time around though, while triangle still brings up your weapon wheel, the weapon wheel also pauses the game, so you can take your time a little bit more when picking which weapon you want to use. Also, if you hold L2, you can now strafe. Strafing means that the camera locks behind you and moving left to right causes you to sidestep, rather than the camera moving to accommodate the player. This means it's much easier to avoid gunfire and attacks. More weapons now come with a lock-on and it makes aiming much more tighter than it was before. What all these changes come down to is a combat that is much more dynamic and fun. While choosing the correct weapon against enemies is still a key aspect of the game, now you also have to avoid enemies' gunfire to be able to stay in range of them. Most enemies use ranged weapons now, and it's much more engaging having to outmaneuver their gunfire while getting in your own shots, rather than just hiding behind a rock and firing remote controlled missiles. These changes result in a much more fast paced action game, which is definitely a step forward for the series. Let's take a look at the weapons. While the first game had 15 weapons, the sequel now has 24. Every weapon from the first game returns, some remain unchanged, but the majority of them have been reworked and turned into new weapons. The new weapons are the Blitz gun, which is a futuristic shotgun, the Bouncer that fires one bomb that explodes into a large amount of smaller bombs, the Chopper which fires a disc that bounces off walls, the Clank Sapper that causes Clank to shoot out electricity when on Ratchet's back, the Gravity Bomb that fires one large bomb for a high amount of damage, the Hover Bomb gun that fires a small bomb directly which is then detonated when you press circle for a second time, the Lancer which is the new version of the blaster, the Lava gun that shoots a stream of lava, the Mini Rocket Tube which is a new version of the Devastator, the Mini Turret Glove that spawns turrets that automatically shoot at enemies that are in range, the Plasma Coil that fires a small ball of plasma that saps any enemies it comes near, the Pulse Rifle that is the Sniper Rifle, the Seeker gun that fires numerous missiles that home in on enemies, the Sheepinator that works like the Morph Array only it now turns things into sheep rather than chickens, the Shield Charger that gives Ratchet an extra hit, the Spider Bot Glove that gives you control of a spider bot that you can use to blow up enemies, and the Symphonoid that gives you hovering bodyguards that will shoot at enemies for you. The Rhino also returns with the Rhino 2, and there is another new ultimate weapon called the Zodiac that destroys everything in its path. The range of weapons is very impressive, and you definitely have a lot of choice about what weapons you can use. The new weapon ideas are great, as they're all creative and they're also useful in different ways. There seems to be more of a focus of using different weapons at the same time, such as using the shield charger for protection, as well as throwing down mini turrets while also using another weapon to shoot at enemies yourself. The choice of weapons is another way in which the combat in this game feels like a massive step forward. A big change to the weapons is the new RPG elements that have been added. Using a weapon will give you experience for that specific weapon, and once you earn enough it will change into a new upgraded version of the weapon. For example, once you use the gravity bomb enough times, it will turn into the mini nuke that fires small nuclear explosions instead of bombs. This completely changes how you think about choosing weapons. You want to upgrade all your weapons, so I found myself using a weapon until I upgraded it fully before moving on to a different weapon. You don't have to play this way, as once you upgrade your favourite weapons you're pretty much set for the rest of the game, but I found it really fun trying to max out my entire arsenal. It's similar to how in the first game it was satisfying getting 100% by fully exploring the planets, only now you're going for 100% by making sure everything you own is upgraded. Your health also upgrades the more you play. You start off with 4 sections of life, but once you kill enough enemies you get a new section of life. You can also upgrade your health by finding nanotech boosts hidden in levels. Unlike the first game, enemies now inflict different amounts of damage, so at first they may only take away 1 section of health, but later in the game when you have about 50 sections or so, they will inflict closer to 8 sections of damage. While the strafing and the new weapons have made the combat great, the RPG elements make it even better. Even if you die, you keep any experience you've earned, so every fight means something. No matter what you're doing, you're always making progress towards being fully maxed out, even if you're not progressing in the story. It's an extra layer of depth to the game that makes everything you do much more rewarding. Many of the gadgets from the first game return, as well as some new additions. Once again, I won't go over all of them, but I find the gadgets to be weaker in this game. They all have their own unique gimmick that adds something to the gameplay, but none of them are that good or interesting. For example, the grind boots return, but the grinding sections are exactly the same as they were in the first game. Instead of the trespasser to open up doors, we now have the electrolyzer and the infiltrator, which are both terrible. In the first game, when using the trespasser, you had to solve puzzles, but with the electrolyzer and the infiltrator, the puzzles are now based on speed and reaction times. This means that once they get hard, they become frustrating. Not all the gadgets are bad, as there's a gadget called the glider that adds sections where you have to glide through tunnels while avoiding obstacles, but none of the gadgets really stood out to me. There's also a lesser focus on having to revisit planets once you find certain gadgets. Revisiting planets is still a part of this game, but it's more messy than before, and you'll most likely forget to do it. If you hate backtracking, then this game's structure will appeal to you more than the first game, but I liked exploring new areas on old planets, and that idea has mostly been removed. You still have multiple missions to complete on each planet, so the game isn't strictly linear, but it's not quite the same. The game makes up for it though by having most of the levels themselves be more interesting. For example, there's a level where you play as Ratchet and Clank separately as they try to break out of prison. There's also a level where you're exploring a small circular planet similar to Super Mario Galaxy. So while the gadgets aren't as good, the missions on each planet are more interesting and unique. There was a greater effort to add variety to Ratchet and Clank 2. The majority of the planet feature either a new gimmick unique to that planet or a mini-game with different gameplay. The first mini-game is the arena, where you have to survive a number of rounds in an arena or complete a certain objective, such as only using your wrench against enemies. While the idea of the arena wouldn't have worked in the first game, thanks to the more dynamic combat, it's a lot of fun. It's also very addictive as it purely focuses on the combat, so you're constantly earning bolts, upgrading your weapons, as well as upgrading your health. It's a great addition that's easy to get lost in when playing. The hoverboard races have been replaced by the hover bike races. Racing with the hover bikes is much better than the hoverboards as you collect speed power-ups and weapons that you can use at any time. I still don't really like them, as all you have to do is keep boosting, find the shortcuts and make sure you take the shortcuts, but they're decent enough. The spaceship dogfighting has been expanded by adding in more controls and having them take place in larger areas. I hate the spaceship battles in this game. They're not too bad once you've beat enough of them to buy all the upgrades for your ship, but the first few you have to play are irritating. You only have one analog stick to control yourself, which makes the aiming and movement feel loose. Also, enemy ships can move and shoot at you perfectly, so you end up taking damage from shots that you have no real way of avoiding. You can barrel roll to avoid gunfire, but this makes aiming much more difficult, so the fights feel clumsy and are just annoying to play. What this means is that you're not really dogfighting other ships. Instead, ships swarm on your position, you do your best to avoid their fire, and then shoot the enemy ships when they come into view. There's no chasing, tactics, or anything to make it engaging. In Ratchet Clank 1, the gameplay sections that mix things up were short, decent, and served their purpose of giving the player something different to do, even if none of them were that amazing. The space battles in this game though take up a decent amount of the playtime, and because they're ill thought out, they feel intrusive. Expanding the space battles wasn't a bad idea, but unfortunately the execution of these sections are poor and it brings the overall experience down. Let's keep going through the additional gameplay by taking a look at the Clank sections. They still retain the same gameplay as before, as in you're giving commands to tiny robots, but now there are a few new robots. There's one that can turn into a bridge, one that has a hammer, and one that can lift blocks. Despite the new robots, not much has changed. The puzzles require no thought and all involve in using the correct robot at the correct time. Giant Clank also returns. You fight certain bosses as Giant Clank by using missiles and punches in a large city on a small spherical planet. It sounds cool, but all it comes down to is spamming missiles while collecting health when you need it, so it's not actually that fun. The arena, hover bikes and space battles all have extra challenges that can be completed to earn more bolts. There's one more side mission where you can earn bolts, and that's collecting crystals. On the planet of Tabora, there is a large open sand dune where 100 crystals are hidden. For each one you find, you receive 1,000 bolts, so there's potentially 100,000 bolts to gain by finding them all. As a way of grinding bolts, it's a decent method, and it allows you to gain experience by doing so. It does quickly become dull however, as it's just finding crystals in a near empty space, and later on in the game on the snow planet Grelbin, there's an area that's exactly the same, only you have to collect 100 moonstones instead of 100 crystals. Completing this task, as well as doing any of the other side missions, is only for those who want 100%, so it would be unfair for me to complain too much about this task being repetitive and dull. It does feel like there's more they could have done with this idea though, as this task is just exploring an area without anything being in it. While I'm being critical, the environments and planets are mostly bland. While there was clearly a lot of effort put into these environments, like in the first game, the colour palette makes everything look washed out. There's a large amount of grey used, and all the bright and bold colours have been replaced with duller tones. There are some cool planets and areas, but when I look back at all the different planets throughout the game, they all seem to blur together, making the majority of them forgettable. The final thing I need to talk about is the return of Challenge Mode, which is actually called Challenge Mode for the first time in this game. Once you beat the final boss, you can replay the whole game while keeping all your experience, weapons and bolts. In the first game, Challenge Mode was a good excuse to find anything you might have missed and obtain the gold weapons. Challenge Mode this time around causes the enemies to be tougher, new challenges are available at the arena, and the mega weapons can now be bought. In your first playthrough, you can only upgrade your weapons once, but buying the mega weapons allows you to start earning experience again to obtain the ultra weapons. This fact alone can make playing Challenge Mode very addictive, to the point where you may find yourself playing through the game several times just to get every ultra weapon. Challenge Mode rewards a player for replaying the game by adding new content and a bolt multiplier that allows you to get bolts easier. This is extremely useful, as it's almost impossible to buy all the weapons without starting Challenge Mode. Bolts are also needed to buy new armor, which can be bought at specific armor vendors and decreases how much damage you take. So, thanks to Challenge Mode, the ultra weapons, the space battles, buying armor, the arena, collecting crystals and moonstones, there's a lot to do and a lot to get invested in. The main game took me close to 12 hours to beat, but thanks to Challenge Mode and all the different weapons to collect, you could easily put in 30 hours and still be playing. Ratchet Clank 2 is an ambitious sequel that adds a lot to the series, but not everything sticks. Almost every aspect of Ratchet Clank 1 was added to with mixed results. The combat and controls allows for more dynamic and better gunfights. The weapon range is improved, and the new experience point system added to the health and weapons adds a whole new layer of depth. The arena is a great distraction, and the challenge mode allows for someone to get completely lost in the game if they allow themselves. Despite that, there's too much baggage weighing everything down. The hover bike and Clank sections feel pointless, the planets don't stand out too much, and the space battles are poorly designed. The story and writing is also a drop off from the first game, which is disappointing. It's still a good game, and the positives do outweigh the negatives, but when looking at the Ratchet Clank main series, it's one of the weaker entries. I don't want to make it seem like I hate this game, and many people might find it better than the first due to the improvements in key areas, but I liked the first game as I knew what it wanted to be and it achieved it. Ratchet Clank 2 wanted to be bigger and better than the sequel across the board, but instead we got an uneven experience. My score is 7.0 out of 10. Ratchet Clank 2 established a lot of the great features and gameplay that the series is now known for, but lacks that consistent quality that the series is also known for.